2 months ago, I did an 8-day sugar diet experiment where I did before and after blood work, DEXA scans, and wore a continuous glucose monitor throughout. To give you the Cliff Notes version of what happened, it wasn't positive. I ended up gaining 5 pounds, my glucose was through the roof, and I began having breakouts on my skin, my gums started bleeding, and my anxiety returned after not being even a thought in my mind for almost 3 years. The last day of the sugar diet experiment was June 5th, and as of recording, it's August 5th. So in today's video, I would like to talk a little bit about the consequences of experimenting with the sugar diet, including how long it took me to lose the weight that I gained, and how long it took my mental and physical health to return to baseline. I also wanted to address some of the questions and comments that I got on the video because there were some interesting lessons and caveats that came up, including if I possibly needed to do the sugar diet for longer, kind of like when you transition over to the carnivore diet and you get the keto flu. Maybe a lot of these things that happened were just because I needed to give my body more time to adjust to the sugar diet. There was another question that came up that maybe my autoimmune condition is, the reason why the sugar diet didn't work for me. Now, one thing that was a staple for me during the sugar diet experiment was electrolytes. So I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Element Electrolytes. Now, in the sugar diet experiment, on day 1, I got the most terrible cramping I've ever had in my life. It was on my left leg and my left hand. I actually thought I was having a heart attack. But then I drank some Element Electrolytes and it went away. So for the rest of the experiment, I had at least 2 packets of Element Electrolytes every single day and I didn't have any more cramping. Now, electrolyte imbalances are really common when you're switching over diets, and I had gone from virtually 0 carbs to like 400 to 700 grams of carbs per day. So it was inevitable that I was going to have some electrolyte imbalances. I just didn't realize it was going to be so bad. So right now, Element is offering my viewers a free sample pack with any order. So you can head to the link in the description. It's drinkelement.com/JennyMiddich. That's DRINKLMNT.com/JennyMiddich and get your free sample pack with any order today. Hey, I just wanted to pop in to let you know I'm doing a huge Element giveaway. I'm giving away 4 full-size boxes of Element Electrolytes to 1 lucky winner. Here's how you enter. So between right now and August 23rd at 11:59 p.m., you go and pre-order my book on whatever book ordering website you use. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, wherever you get your books. Then you take your order receipt that has the order number on it and you forward that on to completecarnivore@gmail.com. And that's it. I'll pick 1 lucky winner on Sunday, August 24th, and I will email you to get your address so I can get these boxes of Element sent to you. This is a $200 value, and all you have to do is pre-order my upcoming book, Complete Carnivore. Each book purchase is 1 entry. So if you order more than 1 book, you get more than 1 entry. It's coming out on November 4th, so maybe you're trying to get some early Christmas presents or take advantage of the New Year, New You, and there's some people that you would like to buy it for. Every book purchased is an entry. So if you buy more than 1, you get more than 1 entry and more than 1 chance to win this free Element Electrolyte package. All right, back to the video. So let's dive into a review of the data that I collected now that I've had a few months to mull it over in my brain. Weight first, I gained weight. The composition of that was 0.3 pounds of fat and the rest was lean mass. So that was mostly water weight. I did not gain 5 pounds of muscle in 8 days. Now you would think since I gained mostly water weight that would have come off quickly, and it didn't. It hung around. I did not get back to my baseline weight of 160 pounds for about 5 weeks after I concluded the sugar diet. And I think a big reason for that was sugar cravings. So the way that I transitioned off of the sugar diet is I went into just plain old keto. And the 2 weeks after the sugar diet concluded, I ended up having a few more high sugar, high carb items. I ended up gaining more weight than I did in the 8-day period. I ended up gaining another 3 pounds. So I peaked at 168 pounds. And then I transitioned to like meat and vegetables. And then I got back into full-blown carnivore by the end of July. And like I said, it took about 5 weeks after the sugar diet concluded to get back to my baseline weight. Moving on to blood glucose levels. My blood glucose normalized about a week after I concluded my sugar diet experiment. And this makes sense. I'm metabolically healthy overall, except for the autoimmune issue. I did, though, want to talk about the wild peaks and valleys that you will see in my blood glucose data. So I have Hashimoto's. It's an autoimmune condition where your body is like attacking your thyroid. It thinks it's the enemy. So with anybody that has an autoimmune condition, be it rheumatoid arthritis, celiac, Hashimoto's, whatever it is, your blood sugar regulation can be a little bit off, especially if you're consuming, simple sugars like I was on the sugar diet. So let me pop my glucose data up for that 8-day period, and you can see like the spikes and the dips are wild. They're all over the place. You can see all day long as I was consuming the simple sugars, fruits, candies, just regular sugar, honey, things like that. My spikes and dips were crazy. And then it would kind of level out in the evening when I would have the protein and vegetable meal. Now overall, even when it kind of leveled out, it was still at a much higher baseline than it was before the sugar diet. I would wake up with glucose between like 110 and 130 almost every day on the sugar diet. Would my blood glucose have been better if I didn't have an autoimmune condition? And that's a really good, valid question. I will say that I've been wearing a continuous glucose monitor for 3.5 years. So I have about 3.5 months of data from before I started the carnivore diet. I remember one instance before I started carnivore that we went to the apple orchard in the fall. We always go to the same apple orchard. They have amazing apple cider donuts, and that's like the only time of the year that I eat apple cider donuts. I think I've talked about it on the channel before. So I went and I had the CGM on, and I wanted to do an experiment. So I had some donuts, I had some vanilla ice cream, and some apple pie, and I think I had some apple cider as well. And on that day, almost 3 years ago, my blood glucose spiked at 176, and I thought that that was super high at the time. But now, if I was to have that exact same meal, I bet you my blood glucose would go higher than 250. Since I'm using the Stello CGM, I wouldn't even be able to see how high it would go. Now, 3 years ago, I did not have Hashimoto's, or at least it wasn't expressing itself at the time. Now, with the Hashimoto's, yeah, I think my blood sugar regulation is a little off. So let's go into the blood work now. Looking at the fasting glucose was almost exactly the same as it was before I started. Same with my fasting insulin, it was good there. A1C stayed the same, of course, because it was only 8 days that I did the sugar diet. So it's not going to affect my A1C number that drastically or at all like it did for me. But the day-to-day glucose for the CGM, it was just wild. Craziness. So I think this just goes to show that anybody out there that has an autoimmune condition, if you're thinking about doing the sugar diet, I would recommend not doing it. I don't think you're going to find success with it. So I mentioned the blood work data a second ago. Within that blood work data, the only number that was off was my HDL. My HDL went from like 80 something down to 54. And I will say that I just got blood work done on July 23rd, and my HDL has recovered. It's back up to 79. So that recovered quickly. And I just wanted to mention, if you're into all this kind of stuff like blood work and DEXAs and continuous glucose monitoring and all that kind of stuff, I have an entire chapter on this topic in my new book, Complete Carnivore, that is coming out on November 4th. This chapter will give you all of the ideal ranges that you're looking for in your blood work, and it will help you to determine where you can order all of this stuff. This book is now available for pre-order, so I'll put links in the description so you can check it out. So now let's move into my DEXA data. I just went and got a new DEXA scan on July 23rd, and I am back to my baseline. Compared to my after DEXA scan after 8 days on the sugar diet, I am now down 0.8 pounds of fat and 6.5 pounds of lean mass. So all of that water weight has finally gone. So just to review, the lean mass reading in a DEXA scan, that doesn't mean muscle. Lean mass is all of your muscle, bones, blood, internal organs, the contents of your stomach, and it also depends heavily on how hydrated you are. You're going to see a bit of fluctuation if you get DEXA scans often enough, but 6.5 pounds of lean mass down, that is still within my lean mass range that I've seen over the past 3 years that I've been getting them done, and so, not really a big concern for me. All of that water that I gained, it's gone now. As far as my visceral fat reading, my visceral fat actually went down by 0.2 pounds during the sugar diet. And that was mostly due to hydration. I ended up having Craig Emmerich on the podcast, and I was able to pick his brain about that topic. And he was talking about how hydration levels can impact your visceral fat levels. So it had gone down to, I think, 0.94. Now on July 23rd, when I got my fresh DEXA scan, back to full-blown carnivore, my visceral fat has gone down by another 0.2 pounds. So it was at 0.74. Now that's not affected by hydration. That's actual loss there because, I lost 6.5 pounds of lean mass. All of that extra water has dissipated. So that's good. Glad to see that my visceral fat is continuing to move in the right direction. Next up is bone density. Now my bone density did decline a little bit on the sugar diet, though it was still in a really healthy range. I didn't think too much of it, but it does make sense that it declined a bit because in a low protein environment, your bones are made out of protein. So if you're not consuming enough protein, then over time, you can have an impact in your bone health. So on July 23rd, my bone health is now, kind of going back up to where it was before. That's good. It would be interesting to do the sugar diet for a long period of time and see what the impact would be on my bones, but I'm just not willing to do that. I did not have a great time with the 8 days that I was on it. And, especially for a person that doesn't do any strength training. So I do a lot of strength training. So my bone health is very good. But if somebody were to try this diet for a long period of time and they were sedentary, I would be very interested to see what the impact to their bone health would be. So now that we've gone through all the data, let's dive into the super fun stuff, all of the criticisms and comments and questions that I got from you guys in the audience. The first up is, you're doing it wrong. So usually about what I was eating, what I wasn't eating, timing, and macro composition. Basically, I was not doing the sugar diet right. So first of all, Cole Robinson is the person that came up with the sugar diet and really popularized it. Now, he's a comedian. I don't know that he has any training in anything nutrition or wellness based. And you know what? It's okay if he doesn't have a formal education. I don't have a formal education. I'm just very passionate about the topic, and he very well could be too. So I'm not gonna throw shade on him just because he doesn't, have a degree in nutrition or whatever. But I really think that he came up with this diet for clicks. And he's changed how this diet is supposed to be eaten 3 or 4 times. So in its early days, it was just simple sugars all day long, no calorie restriction, and then you eat some protein at night and you keep the fat low, but it wasn't super low. Now it's evolved to where it's fat in the gutter, zero fat, whatever, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. So it has changed a lot. So I followed dietary guidelines for the sugar diet based on Mark Smelly Bell's content because he created a ton of content around it. And he was talking about macros and what he ate and all that kind of stuff. So he had the best information. So that's how I built my sugar diet experiment. So what I did was all day long, I ate simple sugars. So regular sugar, honey, fruit. I did that for the first half. I didn't consume any candy or anything like that until the second half. I then included some candy, and then you would stop eating kind of in the early to mid-afternoon, and then for dinner you would have a lean protein and some vegetables with as low a fat as you can keep it, between 10 to 50 grams. 50 grams was the absolute highest I did. I was usually between 10 to 30 grams. And then protein, you wanted to keep that as low as possible, so between 9 to 12%. Based on Nick Norwitz's Substack article and subsequent video that he made on it, a lot of the data is showing 9% or less. So I tried to keep it as close to that as possible. Now I also did a sugar fasting day. So on day 6, all I ate was sugar. I did no protein. On that day, I also did no fat. I think that day I was 1% fat and 3% protein. So I experimented with all of these different macro splits and things like that. And it was all based on Mark's content. I don't think I did it wrong. As far as timing goes, I was just following the timing that was set out by him. In the beginning of the sugar diet fad, starchy vegetables were not included. They are now currently included. So that's a thing now, but I did this 2 months ago, so it was a little different then. So again, Cole has shifted the macros in the sugar diet often. Now it's 0 fat. But when I tested it, it was not 0 fat. It was low fat, but the really important thing was the really low protein, typically under 12% of your macros, because that is what is supposed to activate the FGF21 hormone, which is the mechanism behind how this is all supposed to work. So that would be my response to the criticisms that I did not do it correctly. The next one is you didn't do it for long enough. You got to give it more time. 8 days is not enough time. I did have one comment that said, coming from a lower 0 carb diet, that initially you're going to hold on to more water weight and then you would just kind of release it. Like one day it would just, I call that a whoosh. You'd have a whoosh. And I did have another comment that said, of course you didn't have good results. You have to do it for at least a month, kind of like when you come to carnivore, you get the keto flu, you got to give your body time to adjust. I had another comment that said, after being low carb for such a long time, that the way that I process high amounts of glucose, at least initially, is going to be impacted, and that it can cause some insulin sensitivity issues. I think all of those points are valid, especially the, changing your diet composition so drastically. You are going to have some gastrointestinal distress stuff. I fully expected that. The cramping, the electrolyte imbalances. I was expecting that, though I was not expecting it to be as severe as it was. When my hand and arm cramped up, I thought I was having a heart attack. It was really scary. But then when I had the electrolytes and an hour later, it was okay. But that was wild. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. While that criticism is valid, there is no way I could have stayed on the sugar diet for longer than I did. I don't know how I would stay on it for a month. Just the thought of it is mind-boggling to me. The gastrointestinal stuff, expected. The electrolyte stuff, expected. But the breakouts, the pimples I broke out in my neck was so broken out. My gums started bleeding. Every single one of I would floss my teeth, every single gum would bleed. That does not happen on a regular basis. I never have bleeding gums anymore. You don't consume sugar. Oral health is much better. And then the most wild thing was that my anxiety returned on day 7. So I do not think that those things would have improved or gone away after a month on the sugar diet. I think those things would have continued to get worse. Gastrointestinal, sure, I think my body would have gotten used to eating all of those foods, but the other stuff, no, I do not think so. As far as being low carb and having that impact my insulin sensitivity, perhaps, but my fasting insulin stayed almost exactly the same. My fasting glucose stayed exactly the same. A1C, exactly the same. I'm very insulin sensitive based on all of the markers that you use to determine insulin sensitivity. I really do think the reason why my blood sugar was all over the place, in addition to just eating all the sugar, was the autoimmune stuff. I really do think that because of the autoimmunity, the sugar diet never would have worked for me, regardless of how long I did it. And that brings us to our next comment. This comment is from Scott from Meatstock. He is the organizer of Meatstock. And he talks about how anybody with a leaky gut and an autoimmune condition, if they try this diet, they're gonna feel like crap. That's true. I sure did. I felt like complete garbage the entire time I was doing the sugar diet. I just don't think it would ever work for me because of the autoimmune issue. Now, if I didn't have that, would that be different? Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of people out there that are having success with the sugar diet in the short term, but they're also not testing anything. They're not doing any blood work, DEXAs, anything like that. They're just going off of oh, I'm losing weight. Great. Well, what's the composition of that weight? What's going on the inside? Also, how old are you? Did you come to this with any kind of chronic health conditions? Are you taking steroids? Are you a bodybuilder? Are you young? And I think there's just so many factors that come into play. We also had a really fun, rude comment that said, you did carnivore for 2.5 years and you're still overweight, blah. So this is just, I get rude comments like this often. It's not like it hurt my feelings. I'm so used to it at this point. But yes, I do still have some weight to lose. So the thing is, when you get to be in your 30s and older, there are some other factors that come into play when it comes to weight loss. The Hashimoto is one big driver of why I'm having a hard time losing weight. I have also this year, in 2025, since the beginning of the year, I've been trying to incorporate some more fruits and vegetables into my diet, because a lot of thyroid practitioners out there are like, oh, you have to have carbs to support your thyroid. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a try. And I do N of 1 experiments here on this channel all the time. So I was doing an N of 1 on myself, and I gained 9 pounds of fat eating healthy foods. I was not eating bread. I don't do gluten. I did a little bit of dairy early on, but then I was just like, I cannot do this, cut the dairy. It was fruit and vegetables and salads. And yeah, I gained a lot of weight. So it's just not as simple as it used to be. When I was, I could lose weight so easily when I was young. So you know what, kudos to you. If you're able to, do the sugar diet and lose some weight, I'm jealous. I wish I could do that. It just does not work for me like that anymore. I have now made it back to full carnivore, and I am now down to 153 pounds as of today. And that just works for me. Adding carbs in doesn't work for me. It just makes me gain weight. So I know that about myself, but that could be different for you. I had one comment that talked about how the key was to lower the protein, and then he or she gave some macros on what they were doing to lose weight. And you know what, that's true. You can do this exact same thing if you want to activate the FGF21 hormone. You can do this with moderate carbohydrates, moderate fat, and really low protein. You can do this with really high fat, no carbs, and really low protein. There's lots of ways you can stimulate the FGF21 activation, but going back to Nick Norwitz's Substack article and video, there are just some people this is going to work great for, and then there's some people where it won't work. There's perhaps some genetic influences on FGF21 activation, and also, your lived life experience. Where are you coming from? Nick also mentions how people with type 2 diabetes or obesity, things like that, they most likely have an FGF21 resistance, kind of like insulin resistance, so the sugar diet wouldn't work for them either. It would just make everything worse. Every person is an individual, and for the people that are having a lot of success with the sugar diet, I would say great, nice that you're losing weight, but I really don't think it's going to work for most people. We've already done this, the sugar diet, basically. That's what the standard American diet is. I've had a few people talking about how the standard American diet is high fat. It's not. It's not. 30% of your calories coming from fat, that's not high fat. If you want to do high fat, come to carnivore. Carnivore is 70% of your calories coming from fat. Even at its lowest, it's 50% of your calories coming from fat and 50% coming from protein. You know what I mean? The standard American diet is high carb, low fat, and low to moderate protein. So we've already had that experiment. Why do you think that we're all fat and sick? There was another comment that said weight loss through sugar does not equal healthy metabolism, and I would agree with that. It seems like the main reason people are doing the sugar diet is just to lose weight, and I think the sugar diet is just a short-term solution that's going to have long-term devastating impacts. There are just not that many people that are doing DEXAs or blood work or looking under the hood when they are doing this sugar diet. They're just losing weight because they're starving themselves of protein, and over time that's going to have devastating effects on their overall metabolic health. Also, yeah, okay, you're losing weight, but what's the composition of that weight? Are you losing fat, which is what you actually want to lose, or are you losing muscle and bone and things like that? So Mark Bell was recently on High Intensity Health, and they went over some blood work after, 6 months on the sugar diet. And I'm really glad that he did this because he's one of the main influencers that's pushing the sugar diet right now, and I'm really glad that he's being transparent with his numbers. And they were okay, but there were some that weren't great. His ALT and AST were very elevated. His HDL was in the gutter. His DHEA was very low. He had high homocysteine, but on the other hand, his triglycerides were nice and low. Fasting insulin and fasting glucose were good, and his A1C was good. So it's just showing that he's pretty insulin sensitive. I do think that the sugar diet is having an impact on his health, though. I'd be really interested to see what his visceral fat readings are. They discussed a CAC score in there that he had gotten one, 5-10 years ago, and it wasn't great. I would be wondering if that had gotten worse after 6 months on the sugar diet. But I'm also wondering how much his numbers have been affected by his long-term steroid use. He's very open about how he uses steroids. And when you're pumping yourself full of steroids, you can pretty much eat anything. And you're gonna see positive impacts, you know, in your muscles and your physicality and things like that. But I'm just wondering if some of the elevations in his numbers are due to the steroid use. Only time will tell, but I think the sugar diet is already on the decline, and I'm glad, honestly. I think it was so ridiculous from the start, so I'm just really glad that it's starting to fade from popularity. I am glad that I did this experiment. I love doing N of 1 experiments. They're really, really fun. I always learn a lot from it, and I like to share that with you, so I hope you learn from these. But the impacts to my metabolic health, I don't want to say they were minor, because I did, you know, the anxiety one was really concerning, and it did take me, you know, like a month, 5 weeks to get back to baseline. But if I had stayed on it longer, I think they would have really been bad, the impacts to my health. So it's definitely something that I'm not going to be doing again. There will never be a month-long sugar diet experiment because I value my health and my life. And I don't want to do that. I think we got enough data from the 8 days. I do have a few other N of 1 experiments that are in process now. So if you like stuff like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button and make sure you hit the bell notification, because if you don't do that, YouTube is never going to show you my videos. You have to hit that bell. And you know, if you like this video, give it a like. If you hated it, give it a dislike. I want to know your honest opinion. And of course, if you'd like to take your support a bit further, my book, Complete Carnivore, is now available for pre-order. This is the best way you can support me. Pre-orders are a huge deal for first-time authors, and I am very passionate about helping people improve their metabolic health, and I think this book is going to help get a lot of people back to baseline optimal health. So pre-ordering this book, it's one of the best ways you can support me, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you ahead of time. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.